Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So while we wait for Rivals of Ixalan to shake up Standard, this week we are heading to Modern for a deck that I think is actually super sweet. I'm calling this one Blue-White Monks. It kind of walks the line between blue-white prowess, blue-white tokens, and has some really powerful monks in the deck. So, as you can see, 94 bucks in the paper world, 50 ticks on Magic Online. So, a pretty reasonable price for a pretty powerful modern deck. A quick reminder before we break down blue-white monks for modern. If you enjoy this deck, and you enjoy Budget Magic in general, it would be so spectacular of you if you take a second, click that subscribe button down at the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk Blue-White Monk. So our monk, well, main monks, we have two monks in the deck, but the big one is Monastery Mentor, which I think is a criminally underrated card in the modern format. So it is just really, really powerful if it stays on the battlefield for even a turn. 3 mana, you get a 2/2, but it has prowess. The bigger deal is, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get a 1/1 white monk token with prowess. It's basically like a young pyromancer that costs 1 more mana, and instead of just making 1/1 elementals, it's making 1/1 with prowess. It's a really, really powerful card. And this is kind of the idea of our deck, is we're going to stick a Monastery Mentor, we're going to cast a bunch of spells, make a bunch of tokens, and use our huge board to overwhelm our opponent with monk value. Our second monk isn't truly a monk, it becomes a monk though. That's Myth Realized. So Myth Realized is actually oddly synergistic with our deck. It's a 1-mana enchantment. When we cast a non-creature spell, we get a lore counter. We can also pay 3 and put a lore counter on it. Then we can pay 1 and turn it into a monk avatar with power and toughness equal to the number of lore counters on it. So Myth Realized does 2 things for our deck. First off, we can just run it out on turn 1, and then every time we cast a spell, any non-creature spell, and our deck has a lot of them, we're getting counters, and eventually we're going to have like a 5/5, a 6/6, a 10/10. It's like a build your own Death Shadow as we cast spells. The other thing is, if we play Myth Realized later in the game, it does trigger prowess on Monastery Mentor, and then in the late game, if things go wrong and we can't win quickly with all of our go-wide tokens, we can always dump our mana into putting lore counters on Myth Realized and try to win the game that way. So our 2 monks are both similar in that they want us to cast a lot of spells. So what spells are we casting to trigger prowess on Monastery Mentor and make tokens to get counters on our Myth Realized? Well, we start off with some token producers. So we're kind of trying to go wide with this deck. The upside of, let's say, Raise the Alarm is when we cast it with a Monastery Mentor out, we're not just getting 2 soldiers, we're also getting the 1/1 prowess monk from our Monastery Mentor, and we're triggering prowess on Monastery Mentor to make it a 3/3 so it can attack through more stuff, and we're getting a counter on our Myth Realized. So we get a ton of value from our Raise the Alarms. Also just allows us to block. We can cast it at instant speed to do some tricks with our prowess triggers after our opponent blocks. Gather the Townfolk, basically just a worse Raise the Alarm in our deck for the most part. There are situations where making 5 tokens with Fate Flower is super nice, but for the most part, it's just a sorcery speed version of Raise the Alarm that doesn't give us the same tricks as far as triggering prowess at instant speed. And then Legion's Landing is actually pretty good in our deck because we can go super wide, super quick, so we can flip it around into a Danto pretty easily. Also, 1 mana way to trigger prowess on our Myth Realized, on our monk, so a reasonable amount of value. I would have probably played another 1 or maybe 2, but they're kind of expensive because of standard, like $5 a copy, so could only find room to squeeze 1 in, but still a pretty sweet way to trigger prowess for just 1 mana. So those are kind of our token producing prowess triggerers. We also have a bunch of cantrips. So Serum Vision's pretty straightforward. 1 mana, trigger prowess, cycle through our deck. Top, pretty simple as well. Instant speed. Look at the top card of our library. We can put it on the bottom, draw a card. So these cards are really powerful when we chain them together. That's one of the best things our deck can do, is stick a Monastery Mentor, maybe 2 Monastery Mentors, get down a Myth Realized, and just spend our turn going Serum Visions, into Opt, into Serum Visions. We get a huge board full of prowess monk tokens. We're making our Monastery Mentor huge, our Myth Realized huge, and it also helps us set things up in the early game. The less common card draw / cantrip, whatever you want to call it in our deck, is Shared Discovery. And Shared Discovery is a little bit hit or miss, but when it's working, it is super powerful. Basically, it is a sorcery speed ancestral recall that also requires us to tap 4 creatures if we want to actually cast it, which means we need to cast our Raise the Alarms. We need to cast our Monastery Mentor. However, our deck is kind of built to make Shared Discovery work. So, for example, 2 Raise the Alarm / Gather Gather the Townsfolk gives us 4 creatures. 1 Monastery Mentor plus a Gather the Townsfolk or Raise the Alarm that triggers the Monastery Mentor to get us a monk token equals 4 creatures, lets us have an Ancestral Recall. So it's very easy for us to assemble 4 creatures in this deck, and then we just tap all our useless 1/1s, we draw 3 cards for 1 mana, which is absolutely absurd, and we trigger prowess on all of our stuff. So it's really powerful. Although, there are times when all of our stuff just dies, we don't get the 4 creatures out there, and then it looks a little silly in our hand. But most of the time, Shared Discovery is a great draw, and we're able to generate a ton of card advantage for 1 mana. We also have Smuggler's Copter, which is very synergistic in our deck. It's a non-creature, so it triggers all of our prowess stuff. It's a way we can upgrade our Raise the Alarm tokens, our 1/1 Monk tokens, into a 3/3 flyer that also loops through our deck to find us more cantrips to trigger prowess more often. So it just works really well with every aspect of our deck. Apostle's Blessing, just a one-of, but it's a way we can protect our Monastery Mentor primarily from a removal spell for just 1 mana and a couple of life. Also triggers prowess along the way. Also can sometimes one-shot our opponent with Myth Realized. If we get a bunch of counters on it, we can Apostle's Blessing to give protection from the color of our opponent's blockers. Let's say you got some Death Shadows and Gurmag Anglers, so we Apostle's Blessing on black, swing in with like a 10/10, Myth Realized, close out the game that way. As far as removal, 4 Vapor Snags, just a little bounce, a little bit of damage, slow our opponent down a little bit. One of the great things about our deck is we can jump block ground creatures for basically ever. So we're trying to just assemble this uber value state where we can chump a bit in the early game, and eventually we're going to have this turn where we cast a bunch of non-creature spells in the same turn. Maybe we're chipping in for damage with Smuggler's Copter along the way, and then suddenly we have a whole bunch of like 4/4 or 5/5 prowess tokens from casting all these spells and just close out the game in this one big turn. Mana Leak gives us a little defense against non-creature decks if our opponent's looking to combo off with, I don't know, Storm cards or decks like that. We have more counters in the sideboard as well. Mana base, pretty straightforward. 2 Glacial Fortress, 4 Nimbus Maze, which is one of my new favorite dual lands for blue-white decks in Modern. Used to be too expensive, now it's super, super cheap, even cheaper than Glacial Fortress. So if you're looking to build blue-white decks in Modern on a budget, definitely consider Nimbus Maze as a good budget dual land option. Prairie Stream, a couple of Field of Ruin, some basic lands. In the sideboard, we get a bunch of ways to protect our stuff. Spell Pierce, Negate, to counter removal spells, going in our Monastery Mentors, our Myth Realized, also triggering prowess along the way. More Apostle's Blessing to fizzle removal spells. Opponent might bring in some more removal after sideboarding, so Apostle's Blessing can counter that. Tormod Script for graveyards, another Field of Ruin for Tron. Echoing Truth is kind of a catch-all in Sorcerer's Spyglass to take care of things like Ugins and Karns proactively. And that is blue-white monks for Modern, and that's our budget magic deck for this week. So I think this deck is actually pretty good. I was surprised by how powerful it is. I was shocked by how game-winning Monastery Mentor is. The challenge, of course, is untapping with Monastery Mentor. If we just tap out on turn 3 to cast it, sometimes it just dies, and that's pretty sad. But if we get to untap, even for 1 turn, and especially for like 2 turns, Monastery Mentor just closes out the game at an incredible rate of speed. It gives us ways to chump block to stay alive if we need to, and eventually it just wins the game on its own while we're casting our ops. We're Shared Discovering, we're Serum Visioning, so we're bouncing some up with Vapor Snake, chipping in for damage with our Smuggler's Copter, and the Raise the Alarm Gather the Townsfolk plan actually lets us go pretty wide and gives us lots of chump blockers that can also trigger our Monastery Mentor. Myth Realized eventually ends up being the white version of Death Shadow. Not as fast, but you also don't have to spend as much life. But as the game goes along, very easy to have it be a 4/4, a 6/6, an 8/8, and just dominate the game all by itself. So I think the deck is actually fairly competitive. I was surprised by how powerful some of the interactions were. So anyway, that's our budget magic deck for this week. Blue-white monks for Modern. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, take a second and click that like button down below. It's a great way to help support the channel for free, and you can find the next video in the playlist right here.